If I'm being completely honest, 80% of the reason I'm even making this video is because I really just wanted an excuse to talk about how Eva Green should be Emmy Award winner Eva Green for the show. Hello everybody, welcome back to Meddling Antiquity. My name is Teray, and today we're going to be talking about the first 3 original seasons of Showtime's Penny Dreadful. Now, this is actually a video I've been sitting on for quite some time. It was one of the first full ones that I had drafted out on paper, but I never really felt the timing was right to put it out. I didn't want it to be the first video. I thought it would be too soon to jump into something that's this dark and that there's so much to tackle because there are so many extremely complex characters that were created for the show. However, now that Penny Dreadful has returned to Showtime after a fashion, I decided that now would be the right time. However, I am not going to be discussing City of Angels at all, because as much as I appreciate that they've brought the show back, I think that there was still some closure that was needed from the first, to round out the first 3 seasons of the initial concept of the show that we didn't get, and that unfortunately I doubt we ever will get, which is really unfortunate. So before I kind of go into really diving into the show, I want to go over how I got into it. Let's talk about it. So the idea of something like Penny Dreadful, where you take classic literature characters and put them into the setting but in real life, in real time, is not something that was new to me when I got into the show. In fact, before I'd even heard of Penny Dreadful, I was already a fan of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which, if you don't know League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, it is the comic that inspired the 2003 movie that is the reason Sean Connery doesn't act anymore. But the comics are far more adult and were written by Alan Moore, who, if you're a comic book fan, you'll know as one of the brains behind both Watchmen and V for Vendetta, and Kevin O'Neill, who illustrated the From Hell omnibus comic, which inspired the Johnny Depp film, which he also worked on with Alan Moore. Now, the concept of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is similar to what you see in Penny Dreadful, but it's done in a different way. Already having been a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen fan, by the time Penny Dreadful was brought to my attention, it was something that I was already interested in. The idea of mixing classic literature characters with people who aren't necessarily involved characters was something that was very cool to me. And to see it done in a way that was, I guess, darker and more heavily focusing on like the actual gothic literature aspect of it was really cool. So I was introduced to the show, and I say introduced, and what I mean is I was actually gently bullied into watching it by a very close friend of mine, Isaac, and without him we wouldn't even really be here, would we? But the show, the reason I was drawn to it is partially because I loved how they portrayed the characters that are actually in literature. I think it was very well done, and I think it was actually very true to the intent of the character to begin with. But also because the characters that they created that weren't from classic literature were interesting and so well done and so complex that it made them, they fit so seamlessly into the world that was created around them. Specifically Vanessa, but I'll focus on her later because Eva Green is going to get her whole own section in this because that's what she deserves. So let's get into breaking down the show itself. Diving into the meat of the show itself, I want to first talk about all the classic literature references that are directly made in the show and that are directly referenced. So first we have Dracula by Bram Stoker. You have the actual Penny Dreadful, Varney the Vampire, which was a serial Penny Dreadful. You have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. You have Robert Louis Stevenson's The Curious Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And lastly, you have Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. Now, essentially all of those characters are mentioned by name or actually show up through the course of the show. But there are some characters who do show up more, being Dr. Victor Frankenstein, played by Harry Treadway, and Dorian Gray, played by, as some of you will recognize him from my video about Hadestown, Reeve Carney. It's a very interesting way to do it, and it's kind of the combination of it and how they play the characters into and against each other is very much seamless. So I want to get into the kind of conflicts that each character is dealing with, and let's kind of explore those a little bit. So firstly, I want to talk about the character Ethan, played by Josh Hartnett. And it's the conflict that he deals with has to deal with his family and also a curse that he is under. So Ethan is from America. He grew up in the American West and eventually actually abandoned his family to live with a tribe of Native people. And this kind of plays into, he has very much a crisis of identity throughout the course of the show that is eventually resolved by the end of season 2. But it takes a very long time for Ethan to accept that he is part of any sort of family at all, which is one of the biggest conflicts. The second one is a bit of a spoiler that I'm not going to get into, but it does have to do, it's an ancient curse that was set on him by a shaman in one of the tribes that he was living with. So it's a very interesting conflict of interest almost, because Ethan is this very much, he's a good person. He is a very good person. In fact, he's probably one of the best people in the show. But he has such a problem when it comes to actually internalizing and accepting that he is in fact a good person, that it plays and makes a very interesting conflict that he goes through throughout the course of the show. Now moving on to Victor Frankenstein, as I said, played by Harry Treadway, and his issue is with kind of the morality of his obsession between blurring the lines of life and death, which stems from, in the show, the death of his mother giving birth, or the death of his mother. And it's this very interesting way that it plays out, because when we meet Victor, he has already created the first monster. In the course of the show, Victor creates several monsters. The monster, Frankenstein's monster, as it is termed, has already been created by the time the show starts, which leads to a very interesting conflict in regards to Victor having to hide exactly what he's done from the people he's working with, from Ethan, from Vanessa, from Simbene, and Sir Malcolm. And it's very cool to see exactly how that plays out, because you can see how much he struggles with morality of it. And on top of that, he's also a drug addict. He's addicted to morphine in the show. They've made him this very, very troubled person, which really does fit for medical school dropout Victor Frankenstein. I'm not a particular fan of Frankenstein. It's not my favorite, and I don't really enjoy it. However, I really like how they made Victor a more complex character rather than just this likable asshole that he is in the original material. And I really appreciate that they've made an attempt to kind of humanize this character who is just so awful in the original story. Next, the show also kind of has these very interesting themes of kind of, like I said, morality, which is something that Victor struggles with, although something that Ethan and the character Brona, who is a prostitute that Ethan falls in love with, played by Billie Piper, also struggles with, because Ethan falls in love with her. The age-old adage does in fact apply. But eventually she does die because she has consumption. But her story is very tragic, and it leads her on a very interesting path throughout the course of the show that I will not get into. But this theme of morality plays very much through everything that all of these characters do, but specifically with Victor and Victor, Ethan, and honestly Dorian as well. Dorian also has this very interesting struggle that he goes through because, as most people do know, the story of Dorian Gray is not a happy story. It is a very sad, tragic narrative, and that very much does come through because there's I believe 2 or 3 episodes in the show where Dorian actually falls in love with a young trans sex worker named Angelique. and it doesn't end great. And it makes me very, very sad to think about those episodes. But it's very much this is a show that kind of very much displays the duality of man through these fictional characters and through the characters that were created to interact with these fictional characters. Next, I wanted to get into the themes that also, there's a couple themes that also do tackle race and colonialism in regards to Ethan's native family and Simbene, who is the, I guess, manservant to Sir Malcolm. Simbene is a very obviously a black man, and it's a very similar duality of character that you see, very similar to Stephen, which I covered in my Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell video. But Simbene is being from tribal Africa, having known where he comes from. It's a little different than Stephen, because Simbene knows who he is. He knows exactly what he is and where he stands. But it still doesn't stop people from perceiving him in a certain way. Very similar with Ethan's native family, though, to a lesser extent in the UK when he actually comes to find Ethan. It's a little different for him because it's a novelty. Because Ethan's first appearance is him traveling with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. He was playing a cowboy. And at that time, natives were put in cages and set on display, very similar to what black people and quote-unquote freed slaves were going through at the same time. So there are themes of racism and colonialism that are discussed in the show. And it's done very well, because these characters are played by people who are actually from those cultures, which is always appreciated. And now, I wanted to get into the section where I talk about why Eva Green should be an Emmy Award winner by now, and why I'm really disappointed she's not. Eva Green. What does one say about Eva Green that does not involve yelling at anyone who's ever voted for anyone to win an Emmy for not having her win for Penny Dreadful at all throughout the course of the first 3 seasons? Eva Green should have won an Emmy for at least 1 season of Penny Dreadful. If I could just pick one person to just line up an EGOT and just slide it over to him across a very long table, it would be Eva Green. That's how good she is. And she proves it consistently, time and time and time again in everything that she does. But Penny Dreadful was on another level. Because Eva Green's character, Vanessa Ives, in this show is extremely troubled. She has gone through her life dealing with essentially being the chosen one who will bring darkness to the world. It's essentially the exact opposite of Harry Potter. That's what her destiny is, and she's fighting so hard against it. And one of the biggest things that she deals with is not just morality, but a crisis of faith. Vanessa has dealt with possession and hundreds of other things multiple times through the course of her life, resulting in her being in an asylum. And it's heartbreaking because Eva Green is able to physically and facially, most importantly, her face is able to so well portray exactly what Vanessa is suffering at that time. And I think the best way to get an idea of exactly how incredible of an actress Eva Green was and how perfect she was for this role is to go watch the scene, I will link it above, the seance scene from season 1. It is startling, it is very scary, but it shows you exactly how good of an actress Eva Green is. When you watch it, you will realize, hey, wait a minute, why didn't she win an Emmy for this show? And that's what I'm trying to find out. But it's how she plays Vanessa is this really beautiful balance of this incredibly soft and caring and light woman who has so much love in her with this dark, troubled, and broken person who's struggling to fight her way through everything that she's been through and everything that she's dealing with. And that balance for her is done, it's so well done. And Eva Green, I think, there is no other person who could have played Vanessa as well as Eva Green does. And I think one of the best parts about Vanessa and how Eva Green plays this part is that there is this part in, I believe, season 2 where Vanessa goes out and seeks help for herself, which is where we introduce her backstory with the characters of Joan Clayton and her current history with Dr. Stewart, both played by the iconic, legendary Patti LuPone. But this, it shows exactly how complex her history is, because Vanessa is very deeply a woman of faith first and foremost in her life. But that contrasts with so many other things about her, specifically the fact that she's been possessed by Satan himself many, many times. The fact that the symbol that most identifies her in her witchcraft is the scorpion. The fact that she is a witch at all. It's a very fine line that she's walking, but it's walked so well. And I think that despite all of this, Vanessa still comes across as honestly one of the most sincere and enjoyable characters in the entire show. And it's really sad and unfortunate that Eva Green was not ever really recognized for all the incredible work she did playing that character. And I really do recommend watching clips of her in the show to kind of get an idea as to why it's such an upset to a lot of fans of the first 3 seasons that Eva Green was never actually awarded for playing this incredible role, and B, why we're so upset that there is no closure from the original 3 seasons, because there was a lot left that they could have explored, and they left it off in a place that was really a downer, or really not even really a downer. It was more melancholic, but a lot of people, myself included, wish that there could have been a bit more closure, even if it was just like three or 4 episodes. That would have been fine, just as long as there was some closure. And they'd introduced so many characters in the 3rd season that they had so much left to do, and then they just left it and did City of Angels instead. So now that I've kind of gone over everything that I felt is super relevant to the story without giving too much away, I am going to get into final thoughts. The first 3 seasons of Penny Dreadful, I think, are absolutely incredible. I can't say much about how City of Angels is going to go, and I won't probably ever watch it, because right off the bat, as soon as I saw the first teaser trailer last year, I already had issues with it. The main one being Natalie Dormer playing La Muerte. I don't think all the Latino women were busy, so I don't know why that particular choice was made. However, the first 3 seasons, I think, are super worthy of a watch. There's absolutely no connection that I can think of to City of Angels, so you don't have to watch City of Angels to be able to enjoy the first 3. The acting is incredible. The cast is amazing. It was a well-done show if you were a fan of Gothic literature, if you were a fan of the classics, if you think League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is really cool and you want something interesting to fill that void that's better than the movie, but different than the comics, then League of Extraordinary Gentlemen then this show, Penny Dreadful, is perfect for you. If you're an Eva Green fan, this show is perfect for you. If you thought Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children was alright, but could have been better compared to the book, but Eva Green was a great Miss Peregrine, then watching her as Vanessa Ives is going to kind of fill that void for you. I just really wish that instead of jumping into something entirely new, the creators of Penny Dreadful had given the fan base of the initial seasons the closure that we wanted, and at least done something with the characters they introduced in the end. I think that would have been smarter than just jumping into something new, especially if they were given the idea and the ability to bring the show back. Why not give us the closure that we want? Why not give the fans of the first 3 seasons of the show the closure that we want, the closure that we deserve, the closure that the characters in the show deserve? I think I don't think they should have jumped into City of Angels right away. I think it was a okay decision in regards to marketing, because if Penny Dreadful's attached to it, the fan base will watch. But there's still that kind of gap that's left by the ending of the original 3 seasons. And I think it's really unfortunate that the fans as a whole will probably never get that closure. And I really wish we could. However, the first 3 seasons are on Netflix. I do recommend watching them. It is a phenomenal show, and I am so, so happy that I found it. Eva Green should have won an Emmy, and if you've learned anything from this, welcome to the Eva Green should have won an Emmy club. I am one of many members. I'm not sure who the president was, probably the first person to write an angry letter to the Academy about why Eva Green should have won an Emmy for at least 1 season of the show. So that about wraps us up for this episode of Serial Scrutiny, and join us tomorrow for our next episode of Sociopolitical Smackdown.